In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. I have sat with families in their kitchens long after the children were asleep, and I have listened to husbands and wives describe the same strange detail in the same hushed voice, as though speaking it aloud might give it power. They tell me about the color. Not the overtly occult objects, not the cursed jewelry, not the books of divination they threw away years ago. They tell me about the color they wear, the color they decorate with, the color they have grown attached to without ever asking why. And almost universally, they mistake this attachment for a mere aesthetic preference, a harmless quirk of personality, or simply the influence of fashion. They are wrong. And that misdiagnosis is precisely what allows the problem to persist, to deepen, and to open a door that they never intended to open. What I am about to describe to you is almost universally mistaken for something psychological, emotional, or coincidental. You have likely done it yourself without a second thought. But I am going to give you the 7 marks, the 7 signs, the 7 doors of diabolic influence that are directly tied to what you wear, what you surround yourself with, and specifically the colors you choose to put upon your body. The final item on this list is the one almost nobody recognizes. It is routinely mistaken for something ordinary, even something virtuous, and I will explain at the end why devout people in particular are blind to it. Consider for a moment your own experience. You have stood before your closet on a difficult morning and felt a subtle pull toward one particular garment, one particular who, as though wearing it would shield you from the weight of the day. Or you have walked into a room and felt an inexplicable unease, only to realize that the dominant color in that room matches the dominant color in your own wardrobe. You may have wondered whether something is wrong with your perception, whether you are becoming scrupulous, or whether you are simply overthinking a trivial matter. You are not overthinking. There is an explanation. And by the end of this teaching, you will not only recognize the problem with clarity, you will know precisely what to do about it. Let us begin with the first sign. It is the disturbance of peace within your own domestic church, and it presents itself not as a dramatic manifestation, but as a persistent low-grade friction that you cannot quite trace to any natural source. You are sitting at your dining table, and the conversation turns toward the ordinary events of the day. Suddenly, without any apparent provocation, a sharp word is exchanged. The temperature of the room drops, not physically, but relationally. And you notice, if you are paying attention, that the person who spoke that sharp word is wearing a particular shade that you have come to associate with tension. This is not superstition. I have observed this pattern in enough homes to know that it is not coincidence. The demon acting through the preternatural order can attach itself to material objects not as to a substance, but as to an occasion. He uses the object as a point of contact for disordered appetite. If a soul is particularly attached to that color, if it stirs a vain complacency or a sensual comfort that exceeds the natural order, the demon exploits that attachment to provoke the sin that lies closest to that soul's habitual weakness. The natural explanation is that you are simply having a bad day, that the stress of work has followed you home, or that your spouse is tired. And those explanations are often true in part. But the diagnostic threshold is crossed when the friction occurs with regularity at specific times and in the presence of specific objects or garments. When you remove the object, the friction subsides. When you return to it, the conflict reemerges. That pattern is not natural. That pattern is preternatural. The demon seeks to disorder the domestic church because the domestic church is the primary school of virtue for the soul. If he can destabilize charity within the family, he can destabilize the entire spiritual life of the individual. The remedy here is not to fear the color, but to examine your attachment to it. Ask yourself honestly, does this garment bring me a sense of false security? Do I feel incomplete without it? Do I arrange my day around the wearing of it? If the answer is yes, you have a disordered disposition, and you must renounce that attachment specifically by name in your evening prayers, and you must be willing to set the garment aside as an act of mortification for a season. The second sign moves from the disturbance of peace to the disorder of the home itself. This is the sign of unexplained accidents, breakages, and misplacements that cluster around a particular color. Consider a case in which a devout family could not understand why their home felt perpetually chaotic. They would place blessed objects in a particular room, and those objects would inexplicably fall or shift. They would tidy the living space, and within hours, it would be in disarray again, as though unseen hands had rearranged it. When they examined what was different about that room, they pointed to the curtains, deep emerald green, and they pointed to the throw pillows, the same shade, and they pointed to the clothing they wore when they entered that room, all of which featured the same dominant hue. Now, I must be very clear. The color itself is not evil. God created the green of the grass and the green of the tree and the green of the fertile field, and he pronounced it good. But the demon, who cannot create, can only pervert. He takes the natural affection we rightly have for the beauty of creation, and he tilts it toward an idolatrous end. In that household, the mother had a deep unconscious association between that shade of green and a sense of control over her environment. It was her calming color. She had read in secular wellness literature that green soothes the nervous system. And so she surrounded herself with it, not as a simple preference, but as a psychological crutch. That psychological crutch became a spiritual attachment, and the demon exploited that attachment to create the opposite of calm. He introduced disorder precisely to mock her reliance on a natural object for supernatural peace. The natural explanation failed entirely because the disorder persisted through every natural remedy they tried. They hired cleaners, they organized, they consulted therapists. Nothing changed until they blessed the room with holy water, removed the green curtains, and the mother renounced her superstitious reliance on that color as a source of peace. Within the week, the family reported that the chaos had ceased. The mechanism is simple. The demon has no legal right to act without a point of entry. That point of entry is a disordered appetite, a dependence on the creature rather than the creator. When you treat a color as though it possesses intrinsic power to calm you, you are in effect ceding a portion of your will to a natural agent. And the demon, who is a legalist in the strictest sense, takes that as permission to act. The remedy is to detach. Take the object to a priest and ask for a simple blessing, or Ask the priest to bless you and your home without reference to the object. Then dispose of it or store it away. The act of renunciation, spoken aloud in the presence of the blessed sacrament, is the key. The third sign is the obstruction of the spiritual life and the sacraments. This is where the pattern becomes unmistakable because it directly affects your reception of grace. You have a particular garment, a particular accessory, or a particular color in your living space that you associate with comfort or security. But every time you wear it to Mass, you find yourself distracted beyond the ordinary wanderings of the mind. You cannot fix your attention on the consecration. You feel a heavy drowsiness that is not natural fatigue. You experience a sudden wave of irritation toward the person in the pew next to you, and you leave Mass feeling drained as though you have gained nothing from the Eucharist. This is the work of the enemy, and he is using your attachment to that color as a tool. The theological principle here is that the demon can influence the imagination and the sensitive appetite. He cannot directly move the will, but he can bombard the senses with images and impressions. If you have given him a foothold through a disordered attachment to a natural object, he can use that object as a conduit for those bombardments. The color becomes a trigger for a cascade of distracting images, memories, or associations that are specifically designed to pull your intellect away from the contemplation of divine things. Imagine a man who is deeply troubled by his inability to pray the rosary without falling into a state of mental confusion. He is a convert, fervent in his piety, but he describes a fog that descends upon him every time he kneels before his domestic altar. He has a small rug beneath his kneeler, a rug he purchased because its color reminded him of the Irish countryside of his youth. It is a soft, muted green, and he has become attached to that rug as a way of feeling at home in his prayer. The natural explanation is nostalgia, and that is not sinful in itself. But the diagnostic threshold is crossed when he admits that he cannot pray without that rug, that he feels anxious and unsettled if it is not in its place. That is the hallmark of a disorder. The creature has become a condition for the worship of the Creator. Remove the rug for a month. The fog lifts within a week. Prayer returns to its previous clarity. The remedy is to identify the object that has become a condition for your prayer and to consciously choose to pray without it. This is an act of the will that reclaims your sovereignty over your own domestic worship. You must tell the Lord plainly that you want Him and only Him, and that no color, no cloth, no memory will stand between you and the reception of His grace. The fourth sign is damage to relationships beyond the immediate family, specifically the relationships that form your spiritual support network. This is the sign of isolation. You wear a particular color, or you surround yourself with a particular hue, and you find that friendships begin to sour. Your spiritual director seems distant. Your confessor seems harsh. Your fellow parishioners seem cold. And you attribute this to a failure on their part, but the actual mechanism is that the demon operating through your disordered attachment is inflaming your pride and your sensitivity. The color has become associated in your mind with a particular identity, a particular aesthetic, a particular social class, or a particular set of opinions. And that association has formed a habit of judgment in your intellect You look at others who do not share that aesthetic, and you unconsciously deem them lesser or less refined or less attuned to beauty. That is not charity. That is the vice of pride wearing the mask of good taste. St. Thomas Aquinas teaches that pride is the beginning of all sin because it disorders the appetite for excellence. When you attach your sense of personal worth to an external, natural quality such as the color of your clothing, you have erected a false hierarchy in your soul. You have placed yourself above others on the basis of a superficial attribute. The demon exploits that false hierarchy to isolate you from the communion of saints. He wants you alone because an isolated soul is a vulnerable soul. The remedy here is the virtue of humility, practiced concretely by wearing the color that is least pleasing to you, as an act of voluntary abnegation. If you are attached to green, wear red. If you are attached to blue, wear brown. Do this not out of scrupulosity, but out of a deliberate, reasoned act of the will to mortify your aesthetic vanity. And accompany this with a prayer for the grace to see others as God sees them in their supernatural dignity, independent of any accidental quality. The fifth sign is the most physical, and it is the one that most often drives people to seek medical help. This is the sign of unexplainable physical sensations that cluster around the wearing of a specific color or the presence of a specific shade in your environment. You put on a particular garment, and within minutes, you feel a tightening in your chest, a pressure in your temples, or a nausea that has no digestive cause. You remove the garment and the sensation abates. You wear it again the next week, and the same pattern repeats. The natural explanation is an allergy to the dye or the fabric, and that is a legitimate possibility. I always tell people to go to their physician first. Grace builds upon nature. If there is a natural cause, treat it by natural means. But when the physician finds no allergy, when the dye is common to other garments you wear without issue, and when the sensation is accompanied by a specific emotional state, fear, dread, or an urge to flee, you have moved into a realm that requires spiritual discernment. Consider a woman who comes after years of medical consultations. She has a wool sweater, a rich burgundy color that she loves. She loves it because it reminds her of her grandmother. But every time she wears it, she experiences a sharp pain behind her eyes that would last for hours. She has tested the dye, had the sweater cleaned multiple times, and has even had it chemically analyzed. There is nothing wrong with it. She is asked about her grandmother. It turns out that her grandmother had been a practitioner of folk magic, unbeknownst to the woman until after her death. The sweater had been a gift from that grandmother, and the woman had unknowingly inherited not just a garment, but a spiritual connection to a soul that had been entangled in the occult. The garment itself is not cursed, but the woman's attachment to it, her emotional dependence on the memory of her grandmother, has become a point of entry for a demon that had been given legal access through her grandmother's former activities. The remedy is not to burn the sweater, which would be an act of fear, but to bring it to a priest for a minor exorcism of the object, and then to renounce in prayer any spiritual inheritance from her grandmother that is not ordered toward Christ. She does so, and the pain ceases. The lesson is that our attachments can carry a spiritual weight that we do not perceive. We must examine not only the color, but the history attached to it. The sixth sign is the obstruction of the will itself, manifesting as a compulsive pattern that you cannot break. This is the sign of ritualized behavior around color. You must have your coffee mug of a particular shade. You must arrange your books by the color of their spines. You must dress in a specific sequence of colors at the beginning of the week. And if you deviate, you experience a disproportionate anxiety. The natural explanation is obsessive compulsive disorder, and I affirm that this is a real psychological condition that requires professional treatment. But the diagnostic threshold for preternatural involvement is crossed when the ritual has a specific spiritual content, whether conscious or unconscious. If the ritual is intended to ward off harm, to bring good luck, or to secure a particular outcome, you have moved from a psychological compulsion into a superstitious practice. And superstition, as St. Thomas teaches, is a vice opposed to religion because it attributes to creatures the power that belongs to God alone. The demon exploits this superstitious position to bind the will in a chain of miniature acts that are ultimately aimed at creating a false sense of control. I have encountered souls who could not begin their morning prayer until they had arranged their clothing in a specific color gradient. They did not believe that the colors had power, they told me. They simply felt unsettled if they did not do it. But that unsettled feeling is the enemy's work. He is using the anxiety to keep the soul focused on the natural order rather than on the supernatural order. The remedy is a direct act of the will to disrupt the ritual. Do the exact opposite. Wear the color that makes you uncomfortable. Arrange your books randomly. Force yourself to begin your prayer without any external condition. This is a form of spiritual resistance that reclaims the sovereignty of your will. And you must confess the superstition specifically, naming it for what it is, and ask for the grace of deliverance from that particular habit. Now we come to the seventh sign. You have heard six signs, but none of them has answered the question you came here for. Which color? And the answer may surprise you. The color is green. But I must immediately say to you, with all the gravity and precision I can muster, that green itself is not evil. The green of the grass is good. The green of the tree is good. The green of the fertile field is good. God made them, and he pronounced them very good. So why green? The danger is not the color. The danger is what you may be asking green to do for you. Green is the color of life, of nature, of growth of the earth. And that is precisely why the enemy has chosen it as a primary tool for deceiving the devout. The demon does not attack what you recognize as evil. He attacks what you recognize as good. He perverts the good by exaggerating it, by isolating it from the supernatural end to which it is ordered, and by making it an object of worship in its own right. I have observed this repeatedly in souls who are deeply pious, souls who pray the rosary daily and attend Mass fervently, yet they harbor an attachment to the color green that is disordered. They surround themselves with plants, not because they appreciate God's creation, but because they seek a natural peace that bypasses the cross. They wear green clothing because it makes them feel grounded and connected to the earth. And they speak of nature as though it were a source of grace rather than a sign of grace. This is the heresy of pantheism in its softest, most insidious form. It is not a rejection of God, but a subtle reduction of God to the natural order. The devout person is blind to this because they see the green of the tree and they think of the Creator. But the demon is at work in the background, slowly over years, shifting their affection from the Creator to the creature. They begin to spend more time in nature than in prayer. They begin to seek consolation in a walk through the woods rather than in the Eucharist. They begin to use the language of energy and vibration that has been imported from the New Age, thinking they are merely borrowing descriptive terms, when in fact they are borrowing a whole metaphysical framework that is incompatible with Catholic teaching. Consider a case of a religious sister, a woman who had given her life to Christ in a contemplative order. She was struggling with acedia, a spiritual sloth that made her prayer dry and her duties burdensome. She could not identify the source. She was faithful to her rule, her vows, and her community. But she had a small private garden that she tended with great care, and she wore a green devotional object that she had bought on a pilgrimage. She told her spiritual director that the garden was her sanctuary. That word was the key. A sanctuary is a sacred space, but her garden was not consecrated. It was a natural place. She had, without realizing it, elevated the garden to the level of a sacrament. Her attachment to the color green, to the growing things, to the natural cycle of seasons had become a substitute for the supernatural consolation she was not receiving in prayer. The demon had given her a false peace, a quietism that made her content with natural beauty and indifferent to supernatural grace. She was not troubled by this because she felt calm, but calm is not peace. Peace is the tranquility of order, and order requires that the creature be subordinated to the Creator. In her soul, the order had been inverted. The remedy was severe. She was advised to leave the garden unwatered for a month, to remove the green devotional object, and to replace her prayer of contemplation with the prayer of the church, the divine office, read aloud, so that her intellect was forced to engage with the supernatural truths of revelation rather than the natural truths of horticulture. She did so, and the acedia broke. Her prayer returned to its proper dryness, which is itself a form of purification, and she found her peace not in the garden, but in the altar. This is the final lesson, and it is the one that devout people must hear most clearly. The color green is not evil, but the disordered appetite for green, the attachment to it as a source of consolation, the reliance on it as a means of regulating your emotions, and the subtle elevation of the natural over the supernatural is a grave door that you must close. The demon uses this because he knows that you will resist the correction. You will say, "But Father, I love the creation of God. It leads me to God." And that is true when it is ordered properly. But I ask you, with the pastoral authority of a priest who has heard confessions of the faithful for many years, does it lead you to God, or does it stop at the creature? When you see green, do you immediately think of the resurrection, or do you think of the earth? When you wear green, do you do so to humble yourself before the Creator? Or do you do so because it flatters your aesthetic sensibilities? The distinction is sharp, and it is the distinction between virtue and vice, between supernatural piety and natural sentimentality. Let me recall every sign now. so that you experience the whole architecture once. There is the disturbance of peace in your domestic church where friction appears around a specific hue. There is the disorder in your home where accidents and chaos cluster around a specific object. There is the obstruction of your spiritual life where prayer becomes fog and the sacraments become fruitless. There is the damage to your relationships where pride isolates you from the communion of saints. There is the physical sensation that has no natural cause, a sign of preternatural pressure. There is the compulsive ritual that binds your will in superstition. And finally, there is the green that you mistake for virtue, the natural peace that has become an idol. All of these are door. All of them can be closed. Now, you must ask yourself the hard question. What is your relationship to the colors you wear? Do you choose them freely or do you choose them compulsively? Do you wear them to honor God or do you wear them to comfort yourself? Do you decorate your home with colors that elevate your mind to heaven? Or do you decorate with colors that settle your mind into a complacent attachment to the world? These are not trivial questions. The enemy works in the trivial because he knows you will ignore the trivial. If you have recognized yourself in any of these signs, here is your rule of life. First, go to sacramental confession and confess any superstitious attachment to any color, any object, or any external thing. Name it by name. Do not hide behind vague language. Tell the priest plainly that you have placed your trust in a creature rather than in the Creator. Second, choose one garment in your wardrobe that has the strongest hold on your affection and give it away to a charity. Do not store it. Give it away. This is an act of mortification that cuts the attachment. Third, take up the rosary daily, not as a habit, but as a weapon. The rosary is the crushing of the serpent's head because it contemplates the mysteries of Christ's life, death, and resurrection, and it keeps your intellect fixed in the supernatural order. Fourth, and most importantly, make the sign of the cross with holy water upon entering any room in your home, and do so with conscious intention. This is not a ritual. This is an invocation of the Trinity and a declaration that this space belongs to God alone. I want to say something plainly about the distinction between fear and vigilance. Fear is the enemy's instrument. It paralyzes, it suppresses sharing, it makes you superstitious. Vigilance is the virtue that keeps you awake. It is alertness without anxiety. It is prudence without paranoia. You are not to live in fear of colors. You are to live in the confidence of Christ. You must understand that no demon, no preternatural power, no principality of the air can stand against a soul in the state of grace who perseveres in prayer and obedience to the church. The power of the demon is real, but it is entirely contingent upon your consent, your attachment, your sin. When you close the door through confession and renunciation, the demon loses his legal right and he flees. Now, let me address the objection I know is rising in your heart. You are thinking, this sounds like superstition. You are attributing to demons what belongs to psychology or coincidence. I concede that many cases are indeed natural. I have told you to seek medical and psychological help, and I reaffirm that now. Grace builds upon nature, but I also know from the teaching of the church that the demonic is real, that it is active, and that it operates through the small things because the small things are what we neglect. Saint Ignatius of Loyola, in his rules for the discernment of spirits, teaches us that the enemy acts as a false lover. He hides his intentions. He begins with suggestions that are agreeable to the soul, and he gradually draws the soul into a net of disordered attachments. The attachment to a color is precisely such a net. It is small, it is agreeable, it is natural, but it can become the very rope by which the demon binds the soul. And you may also object, why would God permit this if I am in a state of grace? The answer is that God permits it because he respects your free will. He has given you a garden, your soul, and you are the gardener. You have the authority to uproot the weeds of disordered attachment, but you must choose to do so. God does not remove the weeds by force. He invites you to cooperate with his grace. The permission is a mercy because it reveals to you the hidden attachments that you would never have discovered otherwise. And you may say, I have prayed about this already and nothing changed. I ask you, have you changed? Prayer is not magic. Prayer is the raising of the mind and heart to God. If you pray asking God to remove your attachment, but you refuse to give away the garment, you refuse to renounce the color, you refuse to change your behavior, then you are asking God to do something that he will not do, which is to violate your free will. You must act. You must cooperate. The remedy is a work. This teaching is one part of a longer work. These matters are not resolved in a single sitting, and the formation of a vigilant soul is the work of a lifetime. If you wish to continue being formed in discernment, you are welcome to keep walking with us here at Divine Sentinel, where this work continues week after week for those who intend to remain awake. The door is open and the invitation is quiet because the work is quiet. It is the work of the desert, the work of the cell, the work of the heart. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May he turn his face toward you and give you peace. May he protect you from all evil and bring you to everlasting life. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.